You're listening to the 27-Ounce Podcast. My name is Gershon Rabinowitz. I am joined by Ryan Magnuson, and we are going to be discussing the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs have made so many different moves this offseason, both on and off the field, and here to tell us about it is a very special guest, the voice of the Chicago Cubs on television, Len Kasper, and it's an honor to have you on.
Hey, Gershon, Ryan, great to be with you guys.
Len, you grew up in suburban Michigan as a Tiger fan. What were some of your earliest memories of baseball?
Well, my parents have told me that they took me to Tiger Stadium back in the early to mid-'70s, and it was against the Milwaukee Brewers, and Hank Aaron was on the Brewers roster. He didn't actually play that day, but I have a very vague memory of being at the ballpark probably around, 1975, 76, right at the end of Hank's career. And we didn't go to Tiger Stadium that often. Where I grew up was about 3 hours north of Detroit, but we would try to go maybe once a year or so. And my earliest baseball memories really are of Alan Trammell and Lou Whitaker and Kirk Gibson and that group that really flourished under Sparky Anderson. It's kind of interesting that that group kind of reminds me a little bit of the Baez, Soler, Alcantara, Almora. Kids we've been hearing about for a while. Although I remember Tram, I think, made his major league debut when he was 18, and you just don't see that anymore. But, I love the fact that the Cubs are building from within, and I think that's the right way to do it. And I would also go back to my childhood. Even though I grew up a Tiger fan, I remember getting cable, and one of the first things I did was turn on WGN back in, 1982, 83, right after Harry came over from the South Side and he and Sony on the Superstation. That became a daily part of my life at that time, watching TBS and all the Braves games that were on as well. So I was a big National League fan, even though I followed the Tigers most closely and kind of always drifted toward the National League style of play and, very happy to be able to call games for a National League club.
How did you break into broadcasting and ultimately become the voice of the Chicago Cubs?
Well, I don't know if you have enough time on the podcast to get into all the specifics, but I'll try to give you the Cliff's Notes version. Again, in the mid-'80s, I was, middle school, getting into high school. I played baseball. It was the one sport I played my entire childhood all the way through high school, and I was a pretty average player at best, so I knew that, I didn't have a chance to play beyond high school, and I just loved sports so much that I thought broadcasting would be a great opportunity to make it a career. And growing up as a fan of the Tigers, Ernie Harwell, the longtime Hall of Fame play-by-play voice, he was really my inspiration. And probably when I was 14 or 15, I wanted to be Ernie, and I ended up going to Marquette University in Milwaukee. I'm from a small town, so Milwaukee was pretty big and intimidating to me at the time, but I really wanted to be around some professional sports teams and got an internship with the Bucks my freshman year. Got to cover some baseball games and just was around it a lot. I didn't do a lot of play-by-play out of college. I ended up working at WTMJ, the radio flagship of the Brewers and the Packers and the Bucks and Wisconsin football and basketball. And then in 1999, I got an opportunity to fill in on some television games when Matt Vasgersian, who was doing the Brewers games, started doing some national work. Did about 20 to 25 games a year for 3 seasons. Got some good tape, as they say, and in 2002 applied for the Florida Marlins TV job. Was very fortunate to get that after being a finalist for the Brewers TV job when Matt left, and then the Angels radio job when Darren Sutton left there to come to Milwaukee, and was in Florida for 3 years. And then Chip Carey left the Cubs to go to Atlanta. I applied for that, got it prior to 2005, and now 11 years later, here I am, and it's really flown by. It's amazing how fast it goes, and I've just had a wonderful time here, and hopefully I'll retire as the TV voice of the Cubs.
All right, Len, it's really cool to hear that story and your journey, and Gersh and I getting to hear that as young adults ourselves and knowing that our dreams can come true as well. It's a really inspiring story. We're going to jump into some Cubs stuff right away. So first question I have is in recent years the Cubs have fallen on hard times. They haven't been over 500 since 2009. And having Ricky Renteria as the head of this club, it really pushed them forward, and I feel like he did a really good job. But obviously the Cubs went in another direction, deciding to hire Joe Maddon as new skipper. In your opinion, why do you think the Cubs went in this direction, and what do you think that the mad scientist will bring to the Cubs?
Well, Ryan, I think when Maddon was available, it was just an opportunity the Cubs couldn't pass up. The experience, kind of the way he manages, the way he operates, I think fits really well with this front office. I agree with you. I think Ricky did a really nice job, and especially in the second half. You know, the Cubs, I don't know what the record was, but it had to be around 500. You know, after they got off to the tough start, I thought they really leveled off, and you know, the starting pitching, Jake Arrieta was terrific. Obviously, Samardzija and Hamill were really good until they were traded. Hector Rondon, Neil Ramirez, some guys stepped up in the bullpen. You know, this team didn't score a ton of runs, but you had some breakout seasons. Obviously, Rizzo, I thought, had the best year of any first baseman in the National League. Castro had a nice comeback year. Soler, in a short stint here, really opened some eyes. So, you know, the arrow was pointing up at the end of the year, and even if Ricky had stayed here, I think people would be really, really excited. But now you bring in Joe Maddon, and that adds another component. You know, he in his opening press conference, he said, I'm going to be talking about playoffs and World Series, and I'm going to believe it. And then, you know, after that, you bring in Jon Lester, you bring back Jason Hamill. The rotation right now is very deep. It's quality. There's a lot of quantity as well, which you like. A hard-throwing bullpen. And then you look around the diamond, and a new catching core with Montero and Ross. Tommy LaStella is going to move around a little bit in an interesting left-handed bat. You get Dexter Fowler to play center field. We'll probably see Kris Bryant, you know, not too far into the season, and he should be here to stay. So all of a sudden, a lot of the guys we've been talking about the last 4 or 5 years are going to be here. I think they've supplemented well with the roster in terms of veteran guys they've brought in. And now's the time to see how this team stacks up. Clearly the Cubs are going to be a lot better. Question is, you know, are they going to be better than the rest of this division? It's a tough division with the Cardinals and the Pirates. We'll see how Cincinnati responds to making some changes. The Brewers kind of fell off the face of the earth late in the year, but they're still pretty stacked. So I think it's going to be a really fun division to follow, and I can't wait to get to opening day.
Oh, yeah, same here. And I will actually be going to Game 2. Those tickets were a little steep for my price range at the moment for opening night, but I'm looking forward to it as well. You spoke a lot about, obviously, the moves that we made, or the Cubs made in the offseason, as well as the type of development that has taken place since we'll call it the beginning of the Epstein era, because that's essentially what it is. What are your thoughts on the impact that Theo has made since he officially took over the reins in 2012 as the president of baseball operations?
Well, there are a lot of ways to go with it, but I'm just going to stick with the talent acquisition. I mean, this farm system was not in good shape when he took over, and you know there were a couple of guys in it, you know, including Baez, who were brought in, you know, before Theo got here. But you know, if we just go down the list of guys they've drafted and signed since he took over, it's remarkable. As I mentioned, just starting pitching depth. I've never seen the Cubs have this many options going into spring training. You know, Travis Wood was an all-star 2 years ago, and there is no guarantee he's going to even make the fifth spot in the rotation right now. And I think that says a lot about how they've handled that part of the roster. And then, you know, you go around, and catching was obviously one spot where they needed to maybe go out and get some veterans, which they did this offseason, but it's just about every other position. They're deep not only at the major league level, but they've got waves of talent coming through the minor leagues behind it. And I think that creates a really competitive environment. And I think this is the first year since Theo took over where, you know, everybody in the roster's got to compete, and they've got to produce. And if they don't, there's going to be somebody right behind them who will. And again, I think that really creates a winning environment, and it's a system that a lot of people want to be a part of. So I think this process has worked just about as well and as timely as Theo thought it would. I know there have been some frustrating moments, a 101-loss season a few years ago, and As you mentioned, they haven't barely been over 500 for the last 5 or 6 years, but essentially they knew it was going to take a while, and they knew they were going to be able to turn the corner after the big trade with Oakland last year. And we've seen kind of the fruits of their labor here in the past few months, and now it's time to go out and prove it on the field.
Oh, yeah, and in addition to proving it on the field, I'm going to turn things back to that rotation that you spoke so highly of, and it really is amazing to see just the quality of the arms, not only at the minor league level, but also at the big league level. But there's just one thing that is kind of different now, and that we have a proven ace heading the staff now. So I'm going to turn this question and focus on Jon Lester a little bit. Obviously, he has a lot of postseason experience. His resume speaks for itself. He'll be pitching in the National League for the first time. So what type of adjustments do you think that he'll have to make pitching at Wrigley, and if there is an adjustment period at all for him?
Well, I mean, there's always an adjustment period for a guy who's not terribly familiar with the ballpark. But I always think starting pitchers especially have a big advantage when they go from one league to the other, and especially going from the American League East to the National League. I think he's going to be just fine. His cutter has become, such an important part of his repertoire. You mentioned the big game experience, postseason. And I just think the challenge of coming to a club and, being the guy at the top of a rotation to try to lead it to a World Series title. I think there's a lot of incentive for him with a couple of rings in Boston to be able to say he is a World Series winner with the Red Sox and the Cubs is pretty darn special. He got the contract he wanted. So he got the money, he got the responsibility, and, he goes to a great fan base as well. And I think he'll settle in quite nicely. I don't know Jon personally, but I've met him and watched his press conference and talked to a lot of people who know him, and he's just rock solid, and he's exactly the kind of guy you want at the top of your rotation. A guy you don't have to worry about. Low maintenance, is going to be a guy whose actions speak louder than his words. And you put him with Jake Arrieta and Jason Hamill and Kyle Hendricks, that's a pretty formidable top four right there with, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of interesting and intriguing options beyond that, and Travis Wood and Tsuyoshi Wada and a host of other guys are going to be, battling for that fifth spot. So I'm excited about the rotation. And then I would also say you've got to pitch now. The run-scoring environment has changed considerably, and it kind of goes without saying that you need to have a really solid pitching staff, and I think the Cubs definitely have built one.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And we talked about the rebuilding process with Theo Epstein a little bit earlier. Late last summer, we started to see some of the seeds of that with Javier Baez, Arizmendi Alcantara, and Jorge Soler. What does each player bring to the table, and what impact did they have on the big club last year when they were called up?
Well, it was pretty exciting to see all those guys come up. Alcantara was supposed to originally come up just for a couple of days to fill in for Darwin Barney, and he basically stayed the rest of the way. He had some struggles, no doubt, but I really like the type of player he is. Solid in just about every area. He struck out maybe more than you'd like to see, but he's versatile. He could really be a Ben Zobrist type guy for Joe Maddon, who likes to mix up the lineup and move guys around. And I think the reason they brought in Fowler is because they didn't want to put too much pressure on Alcantara to be the everyday center fielder and leadoff hitter. That's a lot to put on a young player's plate this early in his career. Baez probably is the most intriguing guy going into spring training just because we saw the highs and the lows, and he knows he's got to make more contact. He knows that he's probably not going to be able to go for 5 with 4 strikeouts, 3 days in a row and maintain his spot in the lineup. The Cubs are no longer in development mode, and he's going to get his at-bats. There's no doubt about that, but it's just a matter of can he get him at the big league level as opposed to being sent back to AAA. The guy I was most impressed with is Soler. I like the fact that he's patient. He can hit the ball 900 feet if you throw him a cookie, but he's not in a hurry to get himself out. And with a lineup that, by and large didn't include a lot of walks last year, he was a breath of fresh air. And I think Fowler will help in that regard too. You get Rizzo and Fowler and Soler, Montero's a guy who'll take pitches. Now you're starting to see kind of an on-base laden lineup, the kind of lineup that Theo Epstein, I think, envisioned a few years ago. And when you have that, you can have Starling Castro, who doesn't walk a lot but makes a lot of contact. You can have kind of an all-or-nothing guy in Baez. You can sprinkle those guys throughout a lineup, but it sure helps to have some solid on-base percentage guys to be on base when Baez is standing there, with first and second, one out in an inning, and you're hoping he pops a 3-run homer.
And speaking of on-base guys, Anthony Rizzo was that guy last year. He was that guy in the middle of the lineup, had some big hits for the team, really broke out, made his first All-Star team. What adjustments did he make last season as opposed to the season prior when he had a lot of struggle?
I think the number one, just what he did against lefties. He was outstanding against left-handers this past year. I thought he stayed within himself. He took kind of a two-strike approach throughout an at-bat. And the thing is, Anthony's so strong, and I think he realized this, that he could shorten a stroke and still hit the ball out of the ballpark. There are a lot of guys who made, I thought, really good pitches against him, and he either fought him off by, lining him into left against the shift or simply pulling a curveball, inside the foul pole down the right field line. So he just clearly is relaxed. He understands now that he not only belongs here but is an elite player. I thought he should have won the Gold Glove, and I think he should have won the Silver Slugger. The thing about Anthony is he's been through so much in his life, not only his career. The struggles I think he went through with the Padres, were I think in the end really good for him, and hopefully that translates over to Baez. As hard as it was to watch what happened to him late last year, I really believe that in the end it's going to help him figure out what adjustments he needs to make at this level.
Down in the farm, you have Kris Bryant, who's the top prospect in the system, first-round pick. He's accelerated through there. Has 43 home runs between AA and AAA. Is it premature to suggest that Kris Bryant could break camp with the Cubs after the Cubs traded Luis Valbuena?
That remains to be seen. I think anything's possible. But I do think that, number one, we have to find out, is he going to be the third baseman? Right now the answer is absolutely. He could end up in a corner outfield spot, so we don't know yet. So if that happens this year, I think they, might move him to the outfield and let him play there at AAA, and then, a few weeks later bring him up. If he remains at third, they could just let him start at Iowa and then bring him up, a few weeks in. And as we know, if you wait a little bit, not too far into the season, you might get an extra year before he hits free agency. And, I don't think that's going to be the only factor that plays into it, but I do think the Cubs are going to take a look at all factors in the big picture. I know some Cub fans will say there's no reason for him not to be on this roster, but, you've got to balance the short term and the long term. And, the Cubs do have options at third base, at least on a short-term fill-in basis, if they don't bring him up to start the season. But with Valbuena now gone, obviously the consensus is that's to open up third for Bryant. I've seen him play enough at third where I think he can play that position. He kind of reminds me of Troy Gloss a little bit, but ultimately the bat plays at the big league level. And not that I don't care where he plays defensively, but he's a guy who's going to fit into that lineup somewhere every single day, no matter where he plays on defense.
Yeah, and I can definitely agree with you there. And at this point, it's all about making sure that he's comfortable and that he's completely ready, but also being able to address the business standpoint and having control of him longer, and it'll be good to have his bat in the lineup for sure. Sticking with the whole bat situation, and we touched on Rizzo earlier. I'm going to mention the other Cubs. We'll call him a young star. He's pretty much shot his way through the system and grown, and you've been with the team for, is it about 7 years now?
This will be my 11th year with the Cubs.
With 11th year with the Cubs? Wow. So the guy I'm going to talk about is Starling Castro, and we've seen him grow up from a 19-year-old kid to the man that he is now. And you've gotten essentially a front row seat to all this. And I'm going to ask you, in what areas have you seen noticeable improvement and maturity in him from a purely baseball standpoint? And do you think that he fits into the Cubs' long-term plans, especially having the depth at shortstop, both at the major league level now and in the system?
Well, I think the first part of it is, I've seen pretty much every game he's ever played, every inning he's ever played, and Starling cares a lot, wants to be the best. In terms of hand-eye coordination, maybe is as good as anyone I've seen. His ability to make contact on just about any pitch, whether it's in the strike zone or even outside the strike zone, is pretty remarkable. And, I think he could hit 300 in his sleep. I think, a couple of years ago, I think his brain got in the way because he was trying to do the right thing in terms of maybe taking more pitches, taking more walks. But, the Cubs admitted that probably in the end it was the wrong thing to do. You don't want a guy like Starling thinking too much. He's really a see ball, hit ball kind of guy. And I think he got back to that player and that hitter last year. Defensively, there are going to be lapses on occasion, and shortstop is the most important defensive position, in my opinion, behind catcher. But he's very athletic, and, I thought he did make some improvements last year, and we didn't see quite as many of those moments that maybe we had seen in the past. What I'll be interested to see, and, he made his debut in 2010. The Cubs have not been even a 500 team since. Being on a winning ball club, how is he going to handle that pressure? I think he'll handle it just fine because he's a veteran, and while he's only going to be, 25 years old on opening day, he has been around a long, long time. So they're going to look to him as a leader. Where he fits in the lineup, I'm not sure yet, but you can pretty much hit him anywhere. I mean, he's hit fourth, he's hit leadoff, he's hit eighth. If you look at his career, he's pretty much hit everywhere. So I do think he can fit in this lineup. But you're right. They've got Addison Russell behind him. Baez is a pretty good defensive shortstop. So there could be a point where they decide that they want to go younger and either move him to another position, move Bryant to the outfield, move Starling to third. If Russell plays short, Baez at second. They got a lot of options here. Or they could maybe look to make a trade at some point because Starling has a very affordable contract. It'll be really interesting to see how it goes. But at this moment, I'm counting on him being a part of this thing for the long haul until somebody tells me otherwise.
Oh, yeah, and I think a lot of Cubs Nation would agree with you. Shortstop is a position where they're the best athletes on the field, and you can essentially put them anywhere. And it'll just be cool to see how they fit all these outstanding players on the field together. I'm talking about outstanding young players, and obviously we hear a lot about all these position player prospects that the Cubs have. You hear about Addison Russell, you hear about Kris Bryant, Javier Baez, Jorge Soler. You hear about all those guys, but one thing you don't really hear a lot about is their pitching prospects. And having been around the minor league system and studying them like I do, I know there's a lot of quality arms down there. In your opinion, who do you think are the pitchers who are on the fast track, so to speak, and could possibly gain notice in 2015?
Yeah, it's a good question. You'd probably be better able to answer it than I could, just because I don't see a lot of these guys. When I do, I see them in spring training, and I think I only saw C.J. Edwards throw an inning last spring. I'm very intrigued by what he's done. Obviously, Kyle Hendricks got to the big leagues and was not only as advertised, but was better and more poised than I had ever imagined he would be. I know the Cubs are real high on Pierce Johnson. We saw a little bit of Eric Jokic. I think has a lot of poise. Young left-hander who went to Northwestern. But you're right. I do think they've got some guys at the minor league level who may surprise some people. And as part of the bullpen this year, we may see a kid named Armando Rivero, who I did see a fair amount last spring, who's got a ridiculous strikeout rate and might fit quite nicely into that sixth and seventh inning area. You got to have guys who throw hard. It's just one of those things now. You look around baseball, every bullpen has 2, 3, 4 guys who all throw between 95 and 98. And, Hector Rondon was consistently at 97, 98, even 99 this past year. I love Neil Ramirez's arm. Justin Grimm is a guy who has an assortment of pitches. He's got a starter's repertoire as a short reliever. But you add Rivero to that mix. Jason Mott coming back from Tommy John surgery, and it could be pretty intriguing there in the bullpen. You think about the last couple of years, the way Marmol and Fujikawa struggled, Jose Veras last year, I think going into 2015, this bullpen's going to be in a lot better shape, which will help a lot, and hopefully the Cubs can avoid getting behind the 8 ball in terms of their record in April.
Oh yeah, and I can agree with that. And if these starters can be the horses that they are and get the team to the 6th inning with a lead, it'll be very, very, very hard to score on them. Which I think that'll put to bed a lot of the issues that fans have had in the past, as far as worrying about where the wins are going to come from and if they'll lock down late in the game. The last question I have, as far as from a prospect standpoint, is obviously there's quite a few guys, whether they're on the major league roster now or will be very soon. Which of these top prospects do you think will make the biggest impact on the big league level over the course of 2015, and why?
Well, Bryant, to me, will be kind of the easy choice. Arguably the top prospect in all of baseball. So I think he'll have the biggest impact in 2015. But to me, the one guy I'm most looking forward to watch in the big picture is Albert Almora. Essentially 20-year-old kid who plays center field like he's been doing it for a long, long time. He's got a Derek Jeter-like presence. I don't think he's going to be a guy who projects to hit a ton of home runs, but, could hit for a high average, very good base runner. Just one of those guys you could see as kind of a team leader. And, we really don't put the captaincy on a lot of guys around baseball. Paul Konerko, Jeter, David Wright, a few guys kind of in that vein. But I think Albert Almora, when it's all said and done 5 years from now, is probably going to be the Cubs team captain. So, I'm really looking forward to his major league debut. The other kid is Addison Russell. I keep hearing how great a shortstop he is, and one of the crown jewels of the system. They were able to kind of steal away from the Oakland A's, and I'm excited to see him play a lot in spring training. I haven't seen him play in person yet, so really looking forward to that. And he's a kid we might see at the big league level at some point this year. But to specifically answer your question, I think Kris Bryant's going to be that guy here in 2015.
And we talk so much about the on-field improvements for the Chicago Cubs. They're doing a lot of stuff off the field, especially they're undergoing that $375 million renovation of Wrigley Field. They're adding new scoreboards, improving the bullpens, the press box, so many different areas of the park, the bleachers. What limitations does Wrigley have in its current state, and why are these improvements necessary?
Well, number one, in the baseball facilities, the batting cages are out in the outfield, so you can't go out there in the middle of the game. The infamous story, and it's true, I've seen it. They've got a net in the home clubhouse, and if you're a pinch hitter getting ready to possibly get an important at bat in the 8th inning, they roll down this screen in the middle of the clubhouse, and the guy swings off a tee. In most other ballparks, you can literally run to the batting cage and do whatever you need to do to get ready. So there's just not a lot of room. When it's all said and done, not this year, but hopefully by the start of next season, the Cubs will have the second largest home clubhouse in all of baseball. So that's huge. And that's not something that a lot of fans obviously are going to see. Eventually the bullpens are going to move underneath the bleachers, I think in 2016. And then the revenue streams with the LED board in left, a lot of, structural integrity issues that the ballpark has because it is a century old. If you've been to Fenway in the past couple of years and compare kind of the bowels of the ballpark, the concourses, those things that you normally don't see on television, compare that to what Wrigley looks like currently, it's night and day. And I think ultimately what the goal is here is to make Wrigley look a lot like Fenway does, and that is classic. You feel like you're walking kind of into history and a bit into a museum, but it's a working museum, and I'm excited when it's all said and done. I think it's going to be beautiful, and they're not only going to maintain the history of the ballpark, but add some modern flourishes that make it a little more family friendly. And I think in the end, I think a lot of people are going to be really, really happy with the result. There are going to be some purists who don't want anything done with it, and I understand that. That comes with the territory, and I think the Cubs are taking that part of it very seriously and meticulously. So it's, short-term pain for long-term gain, and I can't wait till the whole thing's done.
And they're going to actually put up a scoreboard in left field, an LED board, and then one in right field. And the reason that they need that for advertising, for different revenue streams. And one of the biggest revenue streams in all of baseball is local television contracts. So in addition to the ballpark, Cubs are going to have some changes on television. Existing deal with Comcast Sportsnet, that's going to go through the 2019 season. But over there, they're going to have a deal with WLS that's for 25 games, and they're going to be back on WGN TV, but only in Chicago. How important was it for the team to remain on WGN Channel 9 in Chicago? And what impact did that station have since 1981 at both a local and then a national level?
Well, I think the relationship between WGN and the Cubs is well documented, and it's a huge part of it. I think when you think about the Chicago Cubs, you have to always say WGN and Wrigley Field. Those two factors. Harry Carey, you can't downplay the impact Harry had on making the Cubs really a global brand. The Superstation was going to go away no matter what the deal was with the Cubs. I don't know. I don't want to get into the specifics, and I only know the basics. But WGN Channel 9 in Chicago and WGN America are two separate stations, and WGN America is now essentially becoming a cable network. And you saw a similar thing happen in Atlanta with TBS, and there was a point, and that point was December 31st, that ended local programming and obviously local sports on the Superstation. So that was going to go away no matter what, but I think it's nice to continue that relationship between WGN TV and the Cubs. It dates back to 1948 when the great Jack Brickhouse did Cubs games on Channel 9. Great to have WLS a part of it, too, the number one rated local station in town. And then the Comcast Sportsnet deal, as you mentioned, runs for 5 more years. So the Cubs have some great television partners, and I think this is a great year for WLS to jump on board. And, the ratings have not been great the past few years just because of the Cubs record. But I think Cub fans are ready to jump right back on that bandwagon. And, I can sense the excitement. And I think the ratings are going to go through the roof.
For fans who are outside of the Chicago area, how are they going to be able to watch Cubs games now that there are these changes? A lot of them they don't understand that there is a separation like this, and they're going to come opening day and they're not going to be able to see the Cubs nationally on WGN America. Where are they going to be able to see the games?
Well, outside of the Cubs territory is deemed by Major League Baseball, the MLB package on television, MLB.TV, you will be able to basically catch all the games. The tough part is in Cubs territory where local stations are not picking up the games. And I know Cubs President Crane Kenny talked during the convention this past weekend that, discussions are going on right now, people in Indianapolis and Des Moines and Rockford, making sure that there's a local affiliate there that, will pick up the WGN games or the WLS games. And if not, hopefully MLB will lift the blackout to allow them to pay for the games and be able to see them. So, there's still some things to work through in that regard. And, it is a little messy, I think, in the short term. But ultimately, the Cubs got financially the deals they wanted locally. And, they had to piecemeal it a little bit because not all of it was available. The Comcast deal was already set for 5 years and only the local games were available. So I think the landscape's going to change at the end of all of these deals moving into the 2020 season. And, we don't know what the landscape will look like. I mean, there may be a point where Netflix may be producing local baseball games in certain markets. So, so much has changed over the past 5 years that I think it's difficult to predict what the world will look like television-wise in 5 years from now.
All right, Len, as much as we've enjoyed picking your brain from baseball standpoint, whether it's the business side of things or on the field kind of stuff, we kind of just want to spend the next couple minutes getting to know you and who you are. So the first question I'm going to ask, I'm a big food guy, and having grown up in northern Illinois, I'm an hour from Milwaukee and an hour from Chicago. And I know that you have ties to Marquette, being that you went to school there. So what would be your favorite, or what is your favorite food spot, whether it be in Milwaukee and or Chicagoland? Do you have a place you like to eat when you go to either spot if you visit?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I'm kind of a breakfast guy. A lot of great dinner places. that I love, and I've been to many of them in both cities. But Tempo is one of my favorite spots, downtown Chicago on I believe it is Chestnut and Lake. 24-hour diner. I could go there and eat their skillet any time of the day. Let's see. I love Chicago pizza too. Paisano's is one of my favorite pizza places in Chicago. Obviously Lou Malnati's, Giordano's. I love all those spots. Let me think here. Cortino's, another great place, kind of an Italian tapas place, downtown Chicago. Miss Katie's Diner is near Marquette's campus on, I think, 20th in Michigan, just off the Marquette campus. Great spot in Milwaukee. I haven't been there in a few years, though, so I may have to get back there next time I'm there.
If you're in the mood for a good burger, I recommend AJ Bombers. It's right by Water Street. Very good burgers, quality ingredients, very, very, very good place. Interesting environment, too.
Okay, I'm in. Cops,
okay.
I'm a Cops guy, too. I haven't been to Cops in a long time.
Oh, Cops is very good. I was there during the season. My brother showed me a very, very, very solid burger place.
Yep.
Okay, I know that aside from calling baseball, you have a number of other interests. I know that you're very into music and that you also host your own radio show in Chicago, and that you're also an avid NHL fan, as all of us are in Chicago. We have a great team over here. What do you do in the off season to keep yourself busy from all the projects you're doing?
Well, I watch a lot of hockey. I was at the Blackhawks game last night. I follow the Red Wings still, kind of a childhood team that I loved growing up. So I can watch, Vancouver, Calgary, if they're playing tonight. I can watch them. Any hockey game. I watch the NFL a lot. Go to a lot of movies. Try to hit some rock concerts. Tennis is kind of my one athletic endeavor that I enjoy very much. I like to run outside, even in the dead of winter, and just be a husband and a dad. Try to essentially just be around the house as much as I can, since I travel so much during the baseball season.
I know you mentioned a lot about sabermetrics, and you're a big fan of Fangraphs. Why are advanced stats such a crucial component of the game, and why haven't some people embraced it yet?
Well, I think the main reason some people haven't embraced this is difficult. Math isn't always that fun. And I didn't love math class, and I try not to make our broadcast into math class. JD's very much into it as well, and I just think there are better numbers than the traditional ones that we often talk about to evaluate players. And, what I try to do as much as I can is not give the raw data, but essentially try to interpret it for the fans and say, instead of talking about defensive efficiency and the like, essentially say, look, this team defensively has been really good. They turn a lot of balls into play, into outs. And, you don't have to get into the nitty gritty of that and say, well, their, defensive efficiency number is 73.5, which is third in the major league. Nobody cares about that. Mm-hmm. They just want to know, is this team good or is this team average or are they bad? So that's kind of how we try to do it. But I use Fangraphs. I use Baseball Reference a lot. WAR, wins above replacement, is a tricky one because there's some people who kind of fight against it. Others really like it. I try to combine a lot of the different numbers and give you as wide a scope as we possibly can on different players and different teams.
And I always say that it's always a war over war, that some people who are for it, some people who are against it, and you just see both sides are so passionate in that argument, but it just seems like the numbers revolution has really changed the game and also the way that teams are managed. There's
no question, and, by and large, Mike Trout's WAR is always going to be pretty good, right? So, good players are good players, great players are great players. Where it's fun and interesting is when you see certain guys who have reputations of being great base runners, great defenders, great hitters, bad base runners, bad defenders, bad this, bad that, and you see some in-depth numbers that kind of contradict that. There are just times where it makes you say, let me look a little deeper. I think Alfonso Soriano kind of stands out. For a long time he was known as just a terrible outfielder, but he wasn't as bad as he looked. The numbers seem to indicate that because of his arm in left field and the fact that he was playing a position where not a lot of athletic guys played, that he actually wasn't as bad, and maybe he was a lot better than people thought. Some people will hear numbers in regards to a guy like Soriano and say, well, that means the number doesn't work because I know he's not good. I think the better way to look at it is maybe he's not as bad as I thought because I'm seeing something here that contradicts what I think I see. I think your eyes can tend to lie at times. I think it's important to use your eyes and anecdotes and things that you see, but it's just trying to put it all together, into one big hopper and then try to determine, is this a guy I think is a winning player, and I think it's a lot easier to do now than it was 10, 15 years ago.
All right, final question. The film Back to the Future 2, they predict that the Cubs are going to win the World Series in 2015. Obviously, it was against Miami in a 4-game sweep. With the Cubs' recent revamp, is it safe to say that the Cubs will be in the mix come October?
Well, I sure hope so. I think the goal right now is to be relevant in the playoff race when September 1st hits. It's been a long time since that's happened, and then anything's possible. And if we could get outgoing Commissioner Bud Selig to put the Marlins in the American League, we've got it all set up.
yeah, it sounds like, and then you get that guy that says, I'm going to put some money on the Cubs, and then he gets rich, and everybody's going to get pretty happy about that. And especially in Chicago, the wait has been long. It's been over 100 years already. They're waiting for that World Series title. They're hoping that the curse of the Billy Goat, that's all over. And it's just been an honor to have you on the show, Len. It was great to have you on. You could follow Len Kasper at Len Kasper. You could follow Ryan Magnuson at RJMag17. You can follow me on my personal account at Gershon and you can follow the 27 Ounce Podcast at 27 Ounce Podcast on Twitter, and you can check us out, 27ouncebaseball.com. Lots of great baseball content out there from the minor leagues, now even into the major leagues. So it's going to be a fun season, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I'm with you. I'm really excited about the Cubs' chances this year. No predictions. Baseball's too mercurial to make any predictions, but I would expect this team to make a lot of headlines this season. It's going to be a fun year on the north side.
And thanks for joining us. For Len Kasper, for Ryan Magnuson, my name is Gershon Rabinowitz. Time to say goodbye. We'll talk to you soon.